Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you today as we unpack a chapter of American colonial history that is, well, it's profoundly dark, but also incredibly resilient. Today, we're zooming in on the events that went down at Sky City, Acoma Pueblo, right at the tail end of the 16th century. We are going to explore the clash of cultures, the devastating violence that followed, and ultimately the amazing, enduring spirit of the Acoma people. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. First, we'll set the scene with the shadow over Sky City. Then we'll look at the spark of rebellion and the three-day siege. After that, we'll examine the judgment and brutal aftermath. And finally, we'll transition from this 16th century tragedy into modern-day protests and some really fascinating Gothic folklore in resilience and modern echoes. Section 1, The Shadow over Sky City, or the looming threat of colonization. Picture this, a towering natural fortress rising straight up from the New Mexican desert. I mean, its sheer cliffs stretch hundreds of feet into the sky. This is Acoma Pueblo, famously known as Sky City. The Caras people had lived here peacefully for generations, but the landscape of their entire world began to shift dramatically in 1598. That's when Spanish colonizer Juan de Oñate arrived, carrying a royal mandate to expand the territory of New Spain. Now, to really understand the friction that was about to ignite, we have to look at the encomienda system Oñate brought with him. Essentially, it was a forced labor strategy implemented by the Spanish crown. Oñate's plan wasn't just to coexist. The strategy involved relocating the Pueblo people, forcing them to work under this system, which, let's be honest, amounted to virtual slavery, and demanding their immediate conversion to Catholicism. That meant completely forsaking their traditional beliefs. It was a direct existential threat to their cultural survival. So what we're looking at here are fundamentally opposing motivations. The Spanish goals were highly aggressive: territorial expansion, forced religious conversion, and locking in that encomienda labor system. In stark contrast, the Acoma goals were deeply defensive, protecting their material wealth, defending their ancestral homes, and preserving their traditional spiritual practices. It was a complete head-on collision of worldviews. Section 2. The Spark of Rebellion. Misunderstandings and violations. By December of 1598, these simmering ideological differences boiled over into outright physical violence. And things went so wrong, so fast, starting with what is honestly a fascinating historical misunderstanding. You see, the Acoma had previously watched Spanish soldiers holding these celebratory mock battles where they would shoot at each other, fall down, and then just pop right back up to keep partying. Because of this, the Acoma genuinely thought Spanish firearms were just harmless theater props. No big deal, right? But then Oñate's nephew, Juan de Oñate, showed up demanding food and shelter. When the Acoma pushed back, his Spanish soldiers forcefully invaded their homes, taking resources and cruelly stripping Caras women right in front of their children. The Acoma, desperate to defend their homes and their dignity, retaliated fiercely against what they thought were lightly armed men. In the clash, they killed Zaldivar and 11 of his soldiers.
Now, to understand what happened next, we kind of have to get into the commander's head. Oñate was raised fighting the Chichimeca rebellions down in Mexico. He knew exactly how fast a rebellion could spread like wildfire. He deeply feared that if the Acoma's actions went unpunished, it would instantly spark a massive, coordinated revolt across all the pueblos. So from a strictly military perspective, he felt an absolute necessity to not just administer justice for his nephew, but to make a brutal, undeniable example out of Acoma Pueblo.
Section 3. The Three-Day Siege. The Fall of Sky City. Fast forward to January 1599. Oñate orders Juan's brother Vicente de Zaldivar to head back to the mesa and enact that brutal example. The colonial vengeance had officially arrived. Now, the Acoma had a massive numerical and geographical advantage here. They were defending a fortified mesa-top position with roughly 1,000 warriors using traditional weapons. Up against them were only about 70 Spanish soldiers, and for 2 straight days, the Acoma successfully defended their home. They held the Spanish off. But on the 3rd day, the Spanish pivoted. They deployed a small cannon. It was a technological terror the Acoma simply hadn't faced before. It breached the defenses and sparked devastating fires that just swallowed up the homes of the pueblo. So the crucial point here is this absolutely devastating number, 800. When the smoke finally cleared and the Spanish stormed the settlement, an estimated 800 Acoma people lay dead. This staggering number represents the men, women, and children who perished in that 3-day onslaught. The human cost was, frankly, heartbreaking.
Section 4, Judgment and Brutal Aftermath. The Cost of Defeat. The siege might have been over, but for the 500 or so Acoma survivors taken prisoner, the nightmare was really just beginning. Oñate's sentences were ruthless. Men over 25 were sentenced to 20 years of slavery, but not before having their right foot amputated. 24 men suffered this exact mutilation. Males between 12 and 25 and women over 12 were also condemned to 20 years of slavery. 60 of the youngest women were actually torn completely from their culture and sent to Catholic convents way down in Mexico City. And just to add to this grotesque psychological warfare, 2 Hopi men who simply happened to be visiting the Pueblo had their hands cut off and were sent back home for the sole purpose of spreading fear of Spain's military might. Now, there's actually an ongoing historical debate about the precise medical nature of those amputations. Oñate's personal journal refers to cutting off las puntas del pie. Some historians argue that the Spanish may have only cut off the ends of the toes, rather than the entire foot, reasoning that they wouldn't want to completely ruin a slave's usefulness for manual labor. Others suggest they were purposely mimicking Moorish tactics of mutilation from Europe to physically mark a defeated enemy. But honestly, regardless of the exact medical extent, the barbarism is undeniable. And the extreme nature of these acts wasn't just shocking by our modern standards. It was recognized as horrific back then, too. When word of the massacre and the mutilations finally reached King Philip III, even the Spanish crown was appalled. Oñate was formally banished from New Mexico for his excessive cruelty to the natives. He ultimately lost his titles, his territory, and was forced to return to Spain in utter disgrace.
Section 5. Resilience and Modern Echoes. Rebuilding and Reclaiming.
Let's shift gears and look at how a community actually builds back from absolute devastation. By 1601, literally just 2 years after the massacre, surviving Acoma people who had managed to escape capture returned to their mesa. They rebuilt their pueblo right from the ashes. And amazingly, Sky City still stands today. It's recognized as one of North America's oldest, continuously inhabited communities. It is a profound physical testament to the incredibly enduring, unbreakable spirit of the Acoma people. This completely illustrates how historical trauma doesn't just fade away into the history books. It echoes loudly into the present. In 1998, during a 400-year anniversary celebration, unknown activists physically cut the right foot off a statue of Oñate in Alcalde, New Mexico, directly referencing those 1599 mutilations. In 2007, Acoma members formally protested a massive Oñate statue in El Paso. And then finally, in 2020, amidst broader national protests, local officials actually took several of these statues down. The pain of 1599 literally shaped the civic landscape of the 21st century.
But reclaiming history isn't always just about protesting statues. Sometimes it's about making really radical art. Contrast the stark historical reality of Acoma survivors being forced to haul massive timbers 40 miles to build a Spanish mission with a modern reclamation through an avant-garde show called Legends of the Southwest. They take this historical trauma and adapt it into a highly stylized Gothic legend about Lucas, a two-spirit native vampire exacting supernatural vengeance on the colonizers. I mean, how cool is that? It's a wildly creative adaptation. It blends grounded indigenous realism with flamboyant, blood-soaked Gothic aesthetics. Our protagonist, Lucas, encounters a traveling troupe of LGBTQ-friendly flamenco vampires. The show uses musical horror, literally turning every stomp, spin, and scream of flamenco dance into a weaponized performance. It channels centuries of ancestral pain into an empowering, electrifying celebration of defiance, allowing the characters to reclaim their dignity and symbolically rewrite their own fate. So we've gone from a very real, very brutal siege in 1599 to the removal of bronze statues to a modern-day vampire musical. But at the core of all of this is a really powerful, lingering question. How exactly does a community heal when the ghosts of its past are not supernatural, but historical? It's a fascinating intersection of real history, ongoing trauma, and the incredible art of survival. Think about that as you go through your week. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on The Explainer, and keep learning.